Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today is all about the Brontes. So I call this 6 Degrees of Brontes. 6 different categories, all about the Brontes. We have books by the Brontes, of course, naturally. We have books about the Brontes. We have books the Brontes read. We have books about the Brontes books. We have books about the Brontes time and place. And we have books and authors inspired by the Brontes. So with those 6 categories, lots and lots of book suggestions, more about the Brontes than you ever knew you needed or wanted in your life. So let's get started. I hope you have your cup of coffee with you. I have my freshly made Americano that my husband made for me. So I have also my hair sticking out strangely. That's just so adorable. Anyways, so I'm going to try and be really quick. I really will try. So we can get through this whole list, and hopefully there are some great recommendations. I know when I was working on this list, I was adding books left and right to my TBR, and I'm going to make a shelf on Goodreads that's just all about the 6 Degrees of Brontes. So you can go see them there. I'll link to that in the description box below. First of all, books by the Brontes. Now, they're the obvious ones. And I have here, let me move my orchid over there. The obvious ones, the ones that come in box sets like this, where we have Agnes Grey, Jane Eyre, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, The Professor, Villette, and Wuthering Heights. And for some inexplicable reason, this box set does not contain, okay, I can move my orchid back again. Does not contain Shirley, which is another book by Charlotte. I don't know why it's not in the box set, weird. But those are the full-length novels that they were, okay, this is gonna be like, yeah. The full-length novels written by the Brontes that everybody knows about to one extent or another. But those are not the only books that can be read by the Brontes. Those are not the only things that they wrote. There are many other things besides, well, a few other things besides. So first of all, we have the very first book published by Charlotte and her sisters, Emily and Anne, was actually a book of poetry, which unfortunately did not do well. I believe in its first printing, it sold a grand total of 3 copies. So yay for them. Bit of a disappointing start to their literary career, but you can still find them today. Readily available. I checked mine out of the library. When I was reading them, I actually read first one by Charlotte and then one by Emily and then one by Anne. And that was a fun way to read them, to compare their different voices, the topics they chose to write about, and the different feel that they each had. So I liked all of them that I read. So we have their poems. Actually, before the Bronte siblings ever published anything, their father, the Reverend Patrick Bronte, was a published author as well. He published several books of poetry, and one is available on, I know I've seen it for Kindle. I got it on Amazon, I think like for 99 cents or something. It's sometimes included on those online, anthologies you can get on Kindle of classics, like all the Brontes work. Sometimes that will be included in there. Anyway, it's called Cottage Poems by Patrick Bronte, which I have not read, but I plan to at some point. And then you have the Juvenilia written by the Bronte siblings. So when they were young, they wrote, but even into their adulthood, they still worked on these and collaborated and daydreamed about these. They each imagined different worlds and different characters that lived in those worlds, and they wrote stories about them, and those stories were like ongoing epic stories. And then they wrote them in little tiny books with little tiny print, and they self-published these books just for fun, for entertainment. And some of them, again, are readily available online, inexpensively on Kindle. A few of them are on Project Gutenberg that you can get. The names, the ones by Charlotte, one is called The Search After Happiness, which is on Project Gutenberg, and the other one was Richard Coeur de Lion and Blendell. And both of those are free on Project Gutenberg to read. So, no Bronte collection is complete without those stories they wrote as children. And we also have one more in this category. I was so excited to get this one in the mail the other day. I ordered it from Pengo Books. The Brontes, A Life in Letters. And this is all letters of all kinds. So this one is Charlotte to Ellen Hayworth, January 12, 1840. Branwell to Francis Grundy Hayworth, 22nd May, 1842. Patrick to the editor of the Leeds Intelligencer, Hayworth, 17 April, 1837. All kinds of letters and ephemera and other things that I am looking forward to digging into. I read Jane Austen's letters a couple years ago, and it was so fun to hear her voice. And you feel like you got to know her better through that than reading her books or reading a biography about her. Like, the letters were just so personal and such a genuine expression of herself. And Jane Austen was obviously witty and very funny. I'm sure it'll be a different feel with Charlotte Bronte and siblings letters, but I'm looking forward to reading through those. So, first category. Then we have books about the Brontes. So this category I could stuff with probably hundreds of books. There's so many books written about the Brontes. People are incredibly fascinated by their lives. But I will mention the ones I've read, and then that I have really enjoyed, and then a couple that I want to read. So first of all, my very favorite biography of the Bronte family, which I read through the library, a digital copy through the library. So I don't have a hard copy of, although I would like to have one, is very, very long. The online version was like 1,000 some pages. I'm not sure how many pages are in the actual hard copy, but a very long book. And it's simply called The Brontes by Juliet Barker, who is the same author who wrote this or compiled this book of letters. So it is so well thoroughly researched. She digs into all kinds of primary sources, newspaper articles, on anything even tangentially related to the Brontes and the situations where they went through. She dug everywhere for information. She digs into their parents' lives and other relatives who had importance, like their aunt, for example, who lived with them for many years. And she digs into some of the mysteries, particularly regarding Patrick Branwell's situation and the scandal that he found himself in. And she really tries to solve all the puzzles about the Brontes, which is my favorite sort of biography. And really well done, very interesting to read. Takes a long time to read, at least it took me a long time, but I enjoyed it very much. So that is The Brontes by Juliet Barker. I feel like it's the best biography, really good. But also, Lynn Reed Banks, if you recognize that name, she was the author of the Indian in the Cupboard series. She wrote a biography, actually it's a duology of a biography about the Brontes. The first one is called The Dark Quartet and is about all the siblings. And the second one is called Path to the Silent Country, which focuses on Charlotte after her siblings passed away and she was on her own until the end of her life. So both of those are very good. Definitely not as much of a researched biography like the Brontes, kind of a different type, but still very worthwhile to read. Then, of course, you can't mention the Brontes without mentioning the book that was written by one of Charlotte's dearest friends, Elizabeth Gaskell, which is The Life of Charlotte Bronte. This one is not this should not be the only biography that you read about the Brontes. Let's just put it that way, because there was a lot of bias going on in there, and because Patrick Bronte and Charlotte's husband, Nichols, Reverend Alan Nichols, they were still, I think that was his name, they were still alive at the time of the writing of this book. And also Elizabeth had her own vested emotional interest in the ways that she shared Charlotte's story. So there's definitely some bias going on. There's some whitewashed aspects of it. And there's some things that Gaskell just genuinely did not know, and so are not in the biography. But it is very good as biographies go. It has importance as just being a biography in the development of that as a literary work. So it's also definitely worth reading, especially if you, like me, also want to read the entire Elizabeth Gaskell collection. And then some that I want to read. I did not know until recently that Daphne du Maurier had actually written a biography specifically about Branwell Bronte, and that is called The Infernal World of Branwell Bronte. So put that on my TBR. And then when I was poking around Project Gutenberg looking for things about or by the Brontes, I found an interesting title published in 1914 called The Secret of Charlotte Bronte by Frederica MacDonald. And this one focuses entirely on the scandal that kind of surrounded Charlotte Bronte about her time in Belgium. Personally, I feel like it's more awkward and cringy than scandalous, because nothing ever happened, but Charlotte, it was all in her imagination. And yeah, just cringe. There's a lot of cringe going on, involving a married man who was her boss. So anyways, this author dig into that and actually went to Belgium, and I don't know if she, I don't know if she actually spoke to them or she spoke to people who spoke to them. In the book, there are supposedly their reminiscences and thoughts about the situation with Charlotte Bronte from their own mouths. So kind of intrigued to read that. That's on Project Gutenberg. And then we have two biographies about the Bronte parents by different authors. The one is The Mother of the Brontes by Sharon Wright. And then we have Patrick Bronte, Father of Genius by Dudley Green, I think. My card says it's a little scribbly, but I think that's what it says. So those interest me a lot, especially the father, Patrick Bronte. What I read about him in the biography by Juliet Barker, I found him to be a very fascinating person himself. And the fact that he outlived his entire family just makes my heart break for him. And he just seemed like such a man of faith and intelligence, and genuinely loved his children, you know, in his own way. Yeah, I just really am interested to learn more about him. So I really want to read that biography about him. All right, good, moving on. So then we have books the Brontes read. They were very well read. Their father had a nice large library, and he homeschooled them for a time, and they were just a very, very well educated, very well read for sure. As children, some books they enjoyed were The Arabian Nights, which they apparently read over and over. Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan was one of their favorites. Not surprising, given that their father was also a preacher, curate, I think was his title. And they also read Paradise Lost by John Milton. Again, not a surprising favorite of theirs. They were very big into poetry. Byron, Wordsworth, Cooper were some of their favorite poets. So they read a lot of works by them. So I actually read earlier this year a volume of poetry by Cooper, and it was difficult. It was, someone had kind of like teased him or whatever, I guess, and said, challenged him to write a poem about a sofa. And he's like, oh, I can totally do that. And so then he wrote this very rambling, long, very extremely long poem with multiple parts to it. And each part having multiple stanzas, very long, very, very, very long, like filled a whole book. Supposedly about a sofa, but rambling quite a bit, very, very often getting into politics and the history of England and religion and his thoughts on religion, and then back to the sofa, and then on other things. And I was like, what are we, like, what is this poem about? I don't even know. So wasn't my favorite, but I like his hymns, which he is, I think, more well known for his hymns. In this collection I have here, I'll just read one stanza. You have probably heard this before. Light shining out of darkness. God moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Skip a little bit. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. So that's Cooper. That's the kind of Cooper I like. So, and then Wordsworth was another one. My heart leaps up when I behold. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. And then, of course, Byron. I think it was probably impossible to be English in the 19th century and not be a fan of Byron. And this, of course, one of his most famous poems. I'll just read the first stanza. She walks in beauty. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. There were other poets that they also read, but those were some of their favorites throughout their lives. And then another author that they read widely was Sir Walter Scott. I have his Ivanhoe, which I have read. I think that's the only one that I have read by him, but I definitely want to read more of Sir Walter Scott. And he was a big favorite with the Bronte family. And then Charlotte, I believe in particular, was a huge fan of William Makepeace Thackeray. And she was able to meet him once she became a published author herself. And then we have books about the Brontes books. So there aren't as many of these as there are about the actual Brontes, which I found very, very interesting. I know, like for other authors, Austen, Shakespeare, Dickens, many books have been written about their actual works, analyzing their works, analyzing their language, analyzing the structure, analyzing their themes, analyzing everything about the works themselves. But everything about the Brontes' work seems to be very much more interested in the Brontes themselves and how that influenced their works, which obviously is a huge part of it, but less about the actual work. So the actual novels. So a few things that I put on my list that I want to read but have not yet. One, and this one it was kind of expensive, so I didn't find it, but I definitely am putting this on my list of books that I will buy at some point. The Oxford Companion to the Brontes is, I think, probably the standard, the one that the most authoritative and definitive, the one that you'd want to read if you wanted to study the Brontes and their works. And then again, poking around Project Gutenberg, I found one that was called The Key to the Brontes Works, published in 1911 by a John Malcolm Dembley. And he connects various aspects of the Brontes' lives or incidents that they lived through or that happened to them, and connects it to their works. So again, not necessarily strictly a look at the works themselves, but tied into the context of who the Brontes were and what their life was like and everything. I'm really sorry about this, guys. It's just distracted me the whole time. Then there is one book I checked out of the library by Karen Swallow Pryor. Now, she has an annotated edition of Jane Eyre, which I have not read, but I would love to have. But she also refers to the Brontes in their books in some of her other books. So I borrowed her Booked out of the library, and she has a chapter in it about Jane Eyre. Let me just read this one paragraph that I found interesting in this chapter about Jane Eyre. Despite these romantic and escapist elements, the center of Jane Eyre, the heroine of that name, is one of the most realistic characters I had yet encountered in the considerable number of novels I had read up to that time. For, unlike most literary heroines, Jane Eyre is not striking, beautiful, or even pretty. In fact, Jane Eyre is quite remarkable in being quite plain. The fact is that Charlotte Bronte specifically set out to create just such a character, an act no less than revolutionary for a novel writer of the time. Her friend, biographer, and fellow novelist Elizabeth Gaskell reports Bronte proclaiming of Jane, "I will show you a heroine as plain and small as myself, who shall be as interesting as any of yours." But even beyond mere physical appearance, Jane is a realistic, not an idealistic figure. So I thought I would love to see a whole book along those lines, in that vein of things. But there is, which I've not read, but I checked out of the library, The Secret History of Jane Eyre, which is by John Fordresher, and it goes into, again, not specifically so much the book itself, but about the things in life that happened to Charlotte Bronte in the years prior to and during her writing of Jane Eyre that influenced the writing. And anyway, so that is about all we've got in that category. So then we have the books about the Brontes' time and place. So that is, obviously, they lived in a town called Haworth in England in the Victorian era. So there are a couple of books that are about Haworth itself, and even like guides that you could use as travel guides if you were there, but it also is fun just to read through them. One is Walking the Invisible, a literary guide through the walks and nature of the Brontes sisters. And then there's more to that title. It's a ridiculously long title by Michael Stewart. So I've not read that one. I put it on my want to read list, but I have read parts of another one, Literary Trails, Haworth and the Brontes by David Walford and Catherine Rain. One of the chapters that I read is actually walks you through the Brontes' house. So it walks you through the house. It goes through each room and it talks about what is displayed there often at the museum and things of significance. So you feel like it's the next best thing to being there. Well, I guess maybe like a video tour would be the next best thing. But if you aren't actually in Haworth, that's a nice option to have, right? And then if you do go to Haworth, which is definitely on my bucket list, you have this handy guide with you, so you can make the most of it. It also has, which I found this super helpful, a floor plan to the house, and which really helps with like picturing it in your mind. And then various pictures of the house from different angles and inside the house. These are official pictures from the museum itself. So anyways, I found that one very interesting. And then there's another one that I really want to get because it's more about the photography than writing. So it's more of a picture book, and it's called In the Footsteps of the Brontes by Mark Davis and Ian Densdale. I'm probably butchering these authors' names because my writing is messy, but anyways. In the Footsteps of the Brontes looks like a fabulous coffee table sort of book that anyone who is a fan of the Brontes should have. So definitely putting that on my wish list. And then one that I have on my Kindle that I plan to read this month for Victober is How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman, which just looks like a fun read with lots of different information about Victorian daily life and what it would have been like to live in England during that time. One more recommendation I have in this category is not actually a book at all, but a YouTube channel. Bernadette Banner has she's a fashion historian, which, first of all, I love fashion history. So fun. And so she deals with all eras of history, but she does have a lot of videos about Victorian times. Her focus is fashion, but also that leads into a lot of other areas of interest about life and times in the Victorian era. One I watched recently, and I will link to it in the description box, was actually about cosmetic surgery in the Victorian times because it was a thing, right? I did not know that. So very interesting video that I found fascinating, and she has a lot of videos on a variety of topics. So finally, that brings us to the last category, which is books and authors inspired by the Brontes. And again, I'm sure that we could have a huge list here of rewritings and retellings of the Brontes books and things, and I have a few of those to mention. And also we could have a list of authors, classic authors and otherwise, who were inspired by the Brontes. But I'll just mention some that I have read and enjoyed, some that I want to read, and some that are more widely known. So first of all, in a previous video, my weekly wrap up from a week ago or so, I mentioned Glass Town, a graphic novel by Isabel Greenberg. And that one is actually, it's about Charlotte looking back on the stories that she wrote with her siblings when they were younger. So they're juvenilia. And you visit the town that she and Branwell created, Glass Town, and the characters that they made and the stories they wrote about. And it's all written in graphic novel form. So that was a great book. I really enjoyed that one. There was another one, which I checked out of the library, but I'm not sure I'm going to actually read. The Glass Town Game by Catherine M. Valenti. And this is a young adult novel, and it is set in Glass Town. And I think it has all the Bronte siblings there, and then all the characters that they made. But it kind of uses this story as a springboard. I don't think it really sticks to the storyline that the Brontes actually had. It just kind of plays with their characters and their setting. So it's really big too. Okay. Then there are also a lot of biographical novels or fictional biographies that are more or less based in fact about the Brontes themselves, about each of them individually. Branwell Bronte, Emily Bronte, and Charlotte Bronte especially. This one that I have, but have not read yet, is The Brontes by Glyn Hughes. I picked this up somewhere secondhand. It says, one of literature's most enduring stories comes to life in Bronte, novelist Glyn Hughes' extraordinary recreation of the tragic lives of Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, their brother Bramwell, and widowed father Patrick. Hughes captures the tiny mill village of Haworth, the loneliness and beauty of the wild Yorkshire hills, the harsh conditions of the girls' charity school, and the fierce closeness of the four brilliant siblings. Combining his own imaginative powers with his profound knowledge of the family, Hughes masterfully reveals both the outer and inner lives of the Bronte women, their brother, and the father who outlived them all. Also, one I picked up somewhere and I want to read, but I've not read yet, is The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte by Siri James. I have read her books, similar books about Jane Austen, and I really liked them. So I'm sure I will write this one. It says, though poor, plain, and unconnected, Charlotte Bronte possesses a deeply passionate side which she reveals only in her writings, creating Jane Eyre and other novels that stand among literature's most beloved works. But it is in the pages of her diary where Charlotte exposes her deepest feelings and desires, and the truth about her life, its triumphs and shattering disappointments, her family, the inspiration behind her work, her scandalous secret passion for the man she could never have, and her intense, dramatic relationship with the man she comes to love, the enigmatic Arthur Bell Nichols. I think I called the wrong first name earlier. Arthur Nichols. So that is that one. I have read this one, The Bronte Plot by Catherine Ray, in which the main character, Lucy Alling, actually visits Haworth. And it's while there that she, like, this whole book is about her kind of quest to discover who she really is and what's important to her. And it kind of has this climactic moment in Haworth. So really interesting. That was a good book. I love Catherine Ray. And then there are a couple of books I want to mention that kind of spin off of Jane Eyre specifically. Now there are others, you know, that are retellings of Wuthering Heights especially. So this one is Mr. Rochester by Sarah Shoemaker, which I read a few years back. And it is the backstory of Mr. Rochester. And she sticks very closely, which I really appreciated, to the story of Mr. Rochester's life as laid out by Charlotte Bronte in Jane Eyre, the clues that she gives us to his past and the things that she tells us. But she just brings that story to life, and you actually go with him to, I believe it's Jamaica, the Caribbean, and his childhood growing up at Thornfield Hall, and his years at school, his life with Bertha, before he realized that she was not well. And anyways, very good, very well done. Another one that is also a backstory of Jane Eyre, but from Bertha's perspective, is The Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rice. I'm not sure how to say her last name, which I did not enjoy at all. And it's kind of considered a classic, but I found it confusing and meandering, crude at times. And it left me with many, many more questions than answers. One thing that I was confused by is that, like, her full name was Bertha Antoinetta Mason. But in this one, they make it sound like her name was Antoinetta. But it's not until Mr. Rochester finally comes to grips with the facts that she's completely lost her mind, that he just starts calling her Bertha, like, for no reason, which was weird. I don't know. Anyways, a lot of weird stuff in that book. I didn't like it at all. But other people do like it, and it's widely acclaimed by, you know, them. So you may like it. Another one that I'm currently reading is John Eyre by Mimi Matthews, which takes the story of John Eyre and tells it kind of inspired by that story, but with significant differences, namely being that Jane Eyre becomes John Eyre, a guy, and then it's Mrs. Rochester, obviously, and Mr. Fairfax instead of Mrs. Fairfax, etc. I haven't gotten very far into it, but there are some supernatural elements in the story. Apparently, I don't know if they all have, like, realistic reason. I haven't gotten that far. or not. But anyways, it's very interesting. Very much has the same Gothic feel of Jane Eyre. And then finally, cannot mention this list of authors inspired by the Brontes without mentioning once more Daphne du Maurier, who a lot of her novels have that same kind of Gothic feel and idea as the Brontes. But in particular, I believe her book Rebecca was inspired by the Bronte novels, especially Jane Eyre. So there are a lot of elements of that, hints of that, and the other Bronte novels in that story. So there we go. Wrapped that up in as brief a time as possible, considering how many books were mentioned. So let me know if any of these interest you or if you have read them before in the comments, and what your thoughts are about them. And I will see you next time.